Hey, it's Dr. C. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to talk about a little thing called sarcopenia. Boy, don't you love those big words? I learned a lot of big words in medical school, you know. Sarcopenia, which means basically a loss of muscle mass. That's all it means. Thinner muscles, smaller muscles, weaker muscles. Weaker muscles are called dynapenia. Oh, I love those big words, like I said. So, loss of muscle mass. Why am I talking about that? Number one, because I've got it. That was a result of the damn COVID again. So I know my shit. I know my stuff. Because I researched it as soon as I had it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about it. Believe it or not, there's a lot to learn. As we get older, they assume that over age 30, you're going to lose anywhere between 2 to 5% of your muscle mass every decade, every 10 years. Especially important when you reach age 80, when you're basically losing 8% in every decade, in every 10 years. 8% once you hit 80. So, I'm well into it. But nevertheless, there's a lot of little parameters about sarcopenia you need to know. It's not just the loss of the muscle mass and of the strength, the functioning, but also a result of the loss of mass and the loss of strength. In other words, your balance tends to go off. There's an increase in falls. There's a problem because you weaken the muscles of swallowing, so you tend to pull things into your throat, coughing half the time when you're eating a little too fast, or you don't chew things totally fine. There's also loss of diaphragmatic mass, too. In other words, you may get short of breath with simple exercising. Like, for example, myself, I used to walk the dog all over the place. I had 2-mile, 3-mile, 5-mile trails that I would walk the dog. Now, with this damn sarcopenia, I can go twice around, maybe a half a mile. I've had it. The dog's ready to go. I'm not. So this is a significant problem with disability that happens as a result of that sarcopenia. So as I mentioned, before we talk a little bit about that, let's talk about the muscle itself. Sarco means flesh in Greek, and penia is the poverty of, lack of. So it's a poverty of flesh. That's the derivation of that. Just like the dyna simply means strength. So, okay, talk about muscles. How do the muscles actually work? They have 2 proteins in each of those muscles. Now, I'm talking skeletal muscles, not the muscles that line your intestine, not the little smooth muscles they call it. These are the strength muscles. These are the skeletal muscles in the arms, the legs, the back, the body, and all. Okay, so skeletal muscles, they have 2 proteins in them, actin and myosin. One is a thicker protein, one is thinner. And they slide on each other. That's how you can contract the muscle and strengthen and relax the muscle. So when you pull it up, the actin and the myosin pull together, you get a little bulge in the muscle, and then relax. So that's how it works. There's also difference in the different types of fibers that are in that muscle. Basically, there are 3 types of muscle fibers. There's the one that are very slow acting. They're called the oxidative slow twitch muscles. And they're in areas of the body where you don't go actively trying to strengthen them and using them a lot, but they basically stabilize the pelvis or stabilize the organism. They're your stabilizing muscles. The ones like in the back, for example, like in the core muscles, they're stabilizers. So they're not twitching all the time. So they're slow twitch, slow twitch. These tend to be very red in color. Okay? Then there's the type 2, a type 2A and a type 2X. They're both very fast twitch, they're called. The predominant number that we have in our body are all 2A, fast twitch. Those are like the biceps, the triceps, the muscles in the thigh. Those are all fast twitch muscles. So they're the predominant ones that are in our body. They tend to be a little paler, like a pink-orange color. And then there's the 2X. Those are also fast, but they use a different type of metabolism. They use the anaerobic metabolism. In other words, they don't need oxygen. They're anaerobes, but they're fast twitch anaerobes. So they also are very pale in color. So those are the types of fibers that are in there. And the fibers themselves are made up of individual myocytes, every little cell in there. Okay, well, that's a description as a background now for the sarcopenia. So, what happens then when you develop sarcopenia? Well, you can have a disease that causes sarcopenia. A lot of the chronic illnesses cause it. There are some diseases that cause it. Main reason for getting sarcopenia is inactivity. You're just not using the muscles. You can also have acute sarcopenia. Let's say you get COVID. Say you get a bad COVID. Bang, in the hospital. Boom. You're on your stomach so that you don't get the pneumonia as badly on your stomach. But nevertheless, you're inactive. Even worse when you have to have a tube put in to ventilate for you. You're really inactive. What happens if you don't go to the hospital? Well, you're quarantined. So you can't go out and exercise with all the boys in the club. So, okay, that makes a big difference. You're relatively inactive. So those are all causes of shrinkage of those muscles. So you can also get, like I said, the acute sarcopenia. The acute sarcopenia are the ones who are really sick, hospitalized. You may even die, but the ones who are really sick for a number of weeks. It's not just a 5-day quarantine. It's a number of weeks that you're just not able to exercise those skeletal muscles. You can lose a very significant amount of weight, and it's usually muscle weight that you lose. Okay? So that's the acute sarcopenia. Then there's the chronic type of sarcopenia. May not even realize that you're beginning to lose muscle mass. I began to see it after several months of having this long COVID thing. I said, gee, I'm not only pooped all the time, I can't walk as far as I used to, yet my oxygen levels are still good. Chest x-ray would still be normal, but what's going on? So I measured the circumference of my muscle in the arm and in the thighs, and it gradually got a little smaller and a little smaller. Now, I know I did lose some fat. I know that. But I also lost muscle. And so that's a more chronic sarcopenia. Neither of them are good. because sarcopenia is definitely related to the severity of any illness that you get. If you're losing that muscle mass, that's not a good sign, especially if it continues. So we need to know a little bit more about it. What puts you at risk to get sarcopenia? Well, first of all, you're not producing the proteins that you used to produce. Now remember, we're turning over our cells every day. We're asking our genes, to go ahead, produce a DNA, produce the cells to recharge the body, to get some new cells in there. All of our cells are turning over all the time. So that protein, though, as you get older, it slows down. You slow down the production of protein. Maybe you need more protein in your diet than your recommended dose of protein. I know the nutritionists probably pulling their hair out. Well, I don't know if you need more or not. Well, baloney. The older you get, the more protein you need in your body. You should get anywhere between 1 to 1.5 grams for every kilogram of your body. And even more so if you have the acute or the chronic sarcopenia. How do you get that into your body? Well, I know we're going to talk about the treatment part, but basically you need at least 4 ounces of meat or fish, or you may need a cup of cottage cheese or some type of cheese like that cottage cheese, beans, nuts, fresh fruit, all ways of getting in additional protein in your body. Okay, so nevertheless, that's one reason why we get it. We are not producing the protein to regenerate our body. Number 2, we do have a definite decrease, at least the men do, women do too, decreased testosterone in the body. Is that significant or not? We're not sure. We also have a decrease in the insulin-like growth factor in the body. Again, is that significant? We're not 100% sure. How do you diagnose it? Well, not everybody goes measuring the circumference of their arms, their thighs, whatever, but there are tests that we can do to see if we have sarcopenia. Number 1, hand grip strength. If you've been to a gym, you can squeeze that dynamometer and get the grip strength in your hands. That's one way if you follow that over the course of time. So, grip strength. Number 2, an ability to sit to a standing position for 30 seconds. How many can you get done in 30 seconds without pushing yourself up? Just stand, sit to stand. Number 3, you get up, walk 10 feet, turn around, come back. That's called a tug test. That also tells you a little bit about the significance of the strength in your muscles. Why are tests like that valid? Well, because as we age, we walk slower. We may not take a step as far. So not only do we walk slower, but shorter steps. May even be a little wider gait than we did when we were younger. All those things are important, and it's important for, say, a physician or somebody who's seeing you to notice those things. Okay, what else? All of these things tend to, like I said, affect your balance, and there's an increase in the number of falls. Also, it plays a role in the development of frailty. Now that's a disease in itself. That happens in the elders. You can have a frail elder who's not able to accomplish a lot of the basic activities of daily living that they used to be able to do. That's frailty. Now, what are the risk factors? The risk factors are, of course, age. Like I said, everybody develops a little bit of that sarcopenia as you get older, over 30. Number one, age. Number two, inactivity. You can understand that. Obesity. That slows you down considerably. You may prefer to just sit and watch the tube, watch your computer, whatever it is. But it's that obesity that does play a role in that as well. Chronic illnesses, especially when it involves the GI tract, bad absorption, like the IBS, like ulcerative colitis, like Crohn's disease, all of those different GI tract diseases like that. I mentioned that we have a decreased ability to convert our protein that we do absorb into energy. Now, is that a problem with the mitochondria in our body and the cells? Those are the energy packets. Is there a problem with that? Dysfunction? Some think that it does have something to do with that as well. In other words, we just are not converting protein into energy like we should. Totally different when you have the acute illness, cachexia, you're not eating at all, totally inactive, and the slow development of sarcopenia that, for example, I had to participate in. So what do we do? What do we do with that? Well, how do we diagnose it? Well, I had mentioned several tests that we do. One is the hand grip. The other is the sit to stand. The other is the tug test. The other is walking for about 40 meters and then walking back. The length of time it takes, the gait you use, all those are ways of diagnosing. There are certain biomarkers, in other words, blood tests and all, that we do to diagnose sarcopenia. Number one, we can use inflammatory markers. Now, doctors may not necessarily like to do the inflammatory markers because they cost money. One very simple one. It's a very simple one. It's called the sedimentation rate. The sedimentation rate, they have to draw the blood, put it into a tube. They take a little bit, they put it into a very thin little tube. Put that tube down in a vertical position. The red blood cells and all will fall at a specific rate. That's called sedimentation rate. Now, when you have sarcopenia, in other words, when you have inflammation, that clumps the red blood cells together. When they're clumped, they're heavier than an individual red blood cell. So they go down faster. They're heavier. So if you have a very fast sedimentation rate, that tells you you've got inflammation. Mine, for example, it's basically number is 60, should be under 10. So I have a lot of chronic inflammation in my body. And that's a simple test. Costs very little. So the doctor shouldn't give you any crap about that. I'd get that done if you feel like you have loss of some muscle and all. See if it's chronic inflammation. Okay, that's number one. Okay, what else? They can measure your hormone levels, the testosterone, the insulin-dependent growth hormone. That costs a bit more. They can also test for the C-reactive protein, That's a very simple test too, not as inexpensive as the sedimentation rate, but nevertheless, it's certainly worth it. They can check your amino acids, especially the leucine and isoleucine. In fact, there's people who have, manufacturers who have put amino acid preparations on the market and said this will help to regenerate a lot of the proteins, give you the proteins that you're not able to absorb or convert into energy. Here's some good ones. So any way to make a buck, let's face it. Now, when you go into a gym, they may even want to check your muscle mass. And they can. They use electric myoimpedance. They put a little electric charge, and they can measure how much is due to muscle, because muscle has a lot of blood cells in it or blood vessels in it, and the speed of the electrical charge goes right through, and then they can compare that with fat. Fat is a very slow generating substance, so they can tell how much fat you have. Not the most accurate in the world, but nevertheless it does give you an idea on a serial basis what it's like. They can do a CAT scan and look at the muscle. They can do an ultrasound to look at the muscles as well. And they have specific areas of the body where they may go ahead and do that as well. So those are all of the types of diagnostic things that can be done to diagnose sarcopenia. Okay, let's go on. Before we talk about the treatment of sarcopenia, we should talk a little further about what actually causes the sarcopenia. Well, first of all, inflammation. Now, it's still a theory, but there's people like me who have chronic inflammation in our bodies. We've had COVID in the past. We've got what we think is long COVID, and that is one way to diagnose it. So inflammation, that's number one. And they can test certain cytokines as well. They can test the interleukin 6, interleukin 10, interleukin 15. They can check all those. But as I say, some of the biomarkers are not cheap to run. Okay. Decrease in physical activity. Just not able to do things like you used to in the past. Poor nutrition. Now, it's not necessarily your fault because we don't absorb the protein, and our protein cannot be converted into energy like it used to. And so we need to increase our protein intake. Okay. So that is another one of the reasons why we get the sarcopenia. Roughly how many people will get sarcopenia after COVID? Because this is really what prompted all this in the first place, was you got COVID. And now, since I've lost the sense of smell and taste, and I've got chronic fatigue, I've got sarcopenia, I got long COVID. What's the doctor going to do? I tell them what I'm going to do. I'm going to increase my protein intake. I'm going to exercise as best I can using resistive exercises, which means using the bands, using light weights as best you can. Or just using your body weight as resistance. So resistance exercises, that's number 2. Number 1 was the nutrition. Number 2, the resistance exercises that we do. Should we take supplements? Well, there are some that seem to be valuable. Vitamin D, for example. When I first started out, my vitamin D level were actually a little on the lower side. So once I knew that I had sarcopenia, I increased it to 5,000 units a day of the vitamin D. Seems, at least to me, that it made a difference. So increase taking your vitamin D, 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 D. Should you take vitamin E? Not a bad idea, but you don't need to increase the dosage of the vitamin E. Should you use the omega-3 fatty acids? There's studies out there now seeing whether the omega-3s compared to people who don't use omega-3s, how they're faring with their long COVID. Personally, I'm taking it. Not mega dose, but just a regular dose of the omega-3 fatty acids. So that is another thing. I've avoided using things like creatine and whey protein, which are the protein drinks that the bodybuilders use. Maybe they'll help. I know there are studies that are using that. There are studies that are comparing people who use large doses of amino acids, like with a lot of leucine, isoleucine, valine, all these different amino acids. And we'll see if that'll make a difference with the long COVID or not. So, at any rate, what it boils down to, I guess, is do things that are at least going to be improving your chronic illness. It is a real thing. It's real. If you have long COVID, and it's estimated up to 40% of people who have had COVID get long COVID, and the worst are in the elder age range. So you may not think you have it, but you're not the same as you were before. Think long COVID. This is Dr. C. Have a good day.